Welcome to Hope Connection. What a joy to have you today. I am so excited about our guest today. This is a really, really important episode today. And I want you guys to meet Dr. Leigh Richardson. We are so glad to have you today.
Thank you for having me.
So her title is this, Brain Performance Specialist. Now that's a title right there. That's
a mouthful.
It is a mouthful. I had to write it down to make sure I said it correctly. So here's my first question. I kind of want to just dive in and say you're a member of our church.
Yeah.
You come to our 8:15 service, you and your husband both, and what a joy it is to have you as a part of Lover's Lane. And then I found out this is what you do. And I'm like, oh my goodness, now more than ever, we need to hear from you. And but I wanted to kind of start at the beginning today and kind of get into this so that we can get into some of the good stuff. But could you tell us a little bit about your background and kind of what led you to this?
Well, Dee Dee, this is really my second life.
Okay.
My first life, I worked in human resources and was in that industry for about over a decade, and I started my own consulting firm. When my sons were in the second grade, one of them got hit by a car, and the other one watched, and I didn't know who to be more worried about. But we went to the emergency room, and we got through it until he got into the fifth grade. I came home from work one day. Mom, sit down. I got to talk to you. Okay. What do you want to talk about? My brain is broke. What? And this was a long time ago. He had gotten on the internet when that was a very scary thing to do. And he had done some research as to why he couldn't remember anymore and why he couldn't focus and why he couldn't concentrate. And he decided he had ADHD. And he tells me this, and I've said, I'm your mom. How can you know what this is? And I don't know what this is. So I said, this is what I'll do. I respect you. I respect your research. I'll go to the school and I'll talk to the counselor. And I did. And basically the counselor said, your son has never failed anything. He's never been a performance problem. He does not have ADHD.
Okay.
Well, he's asked me to help him. How can I help him? He's lazy. I said, well, usually lazy people don't ask for help, but that's all I got. I'll go with it. What can I do? And she said, well, you could put him on Ritalin. So you're suggesting I give my child speed, but there's nothing wrong with him. And for some people, that's a good answer.
Sure.
It was not for me.
Sure.
And I said, why would I do that? And she said, that's the only thing you can do. So there's a mom call to action right there.
Moms can do that, can't we?
Oh, they can. And I started looking and what could I do? And that's when I learned about neurofeedback and neuromodulation and biofeedback. I found a neurologist that he worked with. A side note, I've been in ICU twice with brain injury. At that point in time, I'd only been in once.
Okay.
And when I went in, when I came out from ICU, they said, you've lost your sense of smell. You will never regain it. So I found someone to work with my son, and I thought, well, I'm here. Maybe he can help me. Long story short, I got my sense of smell back. That was a game changer. There's more associated with sense of smell, emotional memories than you could ever imagine.
Wow.
And that's when I made the decision to enter into my second life.
Wow.
And I did that. I called him in one day, and I said, Dr. Walker, here's the deal. I figured out how I can get my didactic training done. I'm going to do my internship with you, and then I'm going to get board certified, and then I'm probably going to work for you. And that's exactly what happened. And I worked for him until 2009 when I started the Brain Performance Center.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And so, I mean, we've seen you on television. You've done so much research on so many things. I looked you up. So I had to do some research because I was so excited when I read this about you. We see you in worship. You're this beautiful lady in worship, and you worship with us. And I'm like, oh, I was so excited when I read what you did. And what hit me was an element that you had on there, and it was I don't know if it was an interview, but you were talking about change. And this really hit me because I feel like more than ever in the life event of our church right now, we're going through change.
Absolutely.
In our country, we're going through change. in the world. It feels like every single day there's change, and our brains sometimes don't handle that well. We're creatures of habit. I'm the worst at that. And so I kind of wanted you to talk through a little bit with us today about what does that look like? What do we do with change? What does our brain do? And why do we get so afraid of change?
Well, that's a good question, Dee Dee, because anytime we encounter change, our brain goes through a lot of different changes. You got different parts of the brains that start changing the way they operate. You've got neurotransmitters going on. That comes from your gut into your brain, and that survival mechanism really kicks in. So how do you adapt to that change? You've got to rewire the way the brain's wiring and firing. And it's because of the way the brain processes uncertainty. Okay. Uncertainty is a threat. When you get threatened, what do you feel?
Mm-hmm. Fear.
And
anxiety. Yeah.
Absolutely.
All of it. Mm-hmm.
And I believe that fear is why it is so hard for us to adapt to change. Because the brain seeks predictability. The brain likes to know what's coming and be able to predict it. And then you've got the amygdala. Okay. And that's the fear center. And anytime you're faced with an uncertain threat, man, that amygdala kicks in, it goes into high gear, and that uncertainty, that kicks in that autonomic nervous system, that adrenal gland starts kicking out that cortisol, and we start riding the roller coaster. Fight, flight, freeze. Fight, flight, freeze. So you've got to, and think about it. Anytime you're creating a change, we have a new pastor coming into this church. When I heard his name, Eddie, I'm like, Eddie, well, I like the name Eddie, but my brain had no clear prediction of what success would look like with Eddie.
Right.
So I don't know. He's from Mississippi, and that's that prefrontal cortex part of the brain. And that's where we reason and we plan. And that's where fear comes into play. And we start thinking about, failure and judgment. Was I judging Eddie because he was from Mississippi? I hope not.
Right.
But it was an automatic response. And our brain, our prefrontal cortex, we overthink the change. We focus on the potential failures, not possibilities.
Wow, the victories that could be in front of us as well, huh?
Absolutely. And you mentioned earlier, we were talking that you are a creature of habit. Most of us are. And that's the basal ganglia. Okay. And that's what controls those habits. That's the habit loop. And boy, does the basal ganglia resist change. Yeah, that's a lot of work if I'm going to have to change. And anytime we get uncomfortable, that changes our behavior. We start avoiding things. Oh, I don't want to do that today. Oh, I don't need to do that today. I can put that up. And then we go into, those habits, they tie into changing. Let's say you want to change your diet. You want to change your exercise. You want to change your spirituality. All of that. When you talk about change, that habit loop, not today, another day.
So we get lazy.
And our brain thinks about all the work it's going to have to do and says, not today.
Yeah, okay. I mean, and that makes a lot of sense because that means I may have to work on me. And I'm in bad habits, or I'm at least in habits of survival.
Well, and many times our brain creates the biggest barriers to our personal growth.
Okay.
Because it thinks about, what is it? It thinks about all the negative. If you do that, you've never done that before, Leigh. What if you do that and it doesn't go very well? Instead of thinking, wow, here's an opportunity. You have never done this before. You don't have anything to compare it to, so it's going to be good.
Wow. Oh, my goodness. That's so much. So from a neurological, how's that, perspective, what happens when the brain actually encounters this change and you're in the midst of the change? There's nothing you can do about the change, but live in it. So how do we get ourselves into that place of dealing with, the anxiety or the fear? What do In my world, we pray.
And that's a good place to start. There's no doubt about that. But, there are things that I always say, you need to have a plan.
Okay.
Have a plan, work a plan. Have some strategies. And with change, start small.
Okay.
We all come bursting out of New Year's Eve, and we have these New Year's resolutions, and we want big change. and that prefrontal cortex says, you're using all my energy just thinking about it. I don't think so. So instead of saying, I'm going to go to the gym 6 times a week, I'm going to work out for 2 hours every time I'm there, start small.
Okay.
Go to the gym 3 times a week. Work out for an hour.
Okay.
And because your brain can, I can do that.
Okay.
I can do that.
Okay.
One of my favorite strategies is habit stacking.
Okay.
And that's because that basal ganglia links new behavior to established routines. So I decided at the first of the year, one of those resolutions, that I really wanted to increase the amount of attention I pay to being grateful, because I have so much to be grateful for.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
And we're all, and I have the best excuse, I'm busy. I'm really busy, just like you are. So I decided that I would spend my time in the morning when I get my first cup of coffee, and I would have
Everything's better with the first cup of coffee.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I could be grateful for that.
Exactly.
But I'll start my gratefulness with my coffee. And by doing that, it was so much easier to do. I'll just stack one habit on top of the other.
Wow.
And why, if it's that easy, haven't I done it before? Because I never stopped and thought about it.
Wow.
And that's important. And everything we do, we're triggered. We're triggered by what we see visually. We're triggered by what's in our environment. And the brain depends upon those cues. For so many clients that I have, always the first of the year, you're either working on managing your money or managing your body. And with managing your money, so how often do you look at your bank account?
Right.
Oh, I don't really like to do that. I would really prefer not to do that. Well, look at that bank account once a day. Get that visual trigger in front of you. Be conscious and be aware of that. That ties into that prefrontal cortex. We've got to understand, and this is really one of my biggest goals. The brain is an organ just like the heart.
Wow.
And if you think there's something wrong with your heart, how long does it take you to pick up the phone and get an appointment with a cardiologist? Not very long. If you wake up one morning and, I just don't know if I can do this today. I'm just anxious. What happens? You have these nasty conversations with yourself. Suck it up, buttercup.
Yeah.
Power through, guy. And that's not what needs to happen. So if we stop and think that our brain is an organ, as women, the largest organ we have is our skin. I have a morning routine, and I have an evening routine that I use with my skin. Do I have a brain routine in the morning? I do now with my gratefulness, but do I have an evening routine? So stop and think about your brain and how it controls your emotions and your social interactions. It's more than just on a cognitive level.
Right. Wow. So what is the first step?
So I think the first step is to really, one of my favorite rules, and I don't like rules,
right?
But it's the 80-20 rule.
Okay.
Focus on high impact change. Target what can make the biggest difference, because 20% of your actions control 80% of your results.
Oh, wow.
So, the first step is just stop and think, how can I make the biggest change?
Wow.
Instead of, I'm going to change 7 things this week. No. Change 1 thing this week.
So it's interesting because I was thinking about from ministry, and one of the things that hit me in a communications class that I had was we had this line that we would use called hit the pause.
Love it.
And whatever was going on hit the pause before you react. Hit the pause before you go into whatever your emotion or whatever you're feeling would be. Hit the pause. And that's helped me a lot in ministry, because we come up upon things that are really hard or fun or tricky sometimes. And so what that has taught me is, okay, before I react, before I say something, before I feel something, sometimes hit the pause and examine what this means. And it's brought a lot of help and comfort to me. I think sometimes it works, and then sometimes I can't help it. I just go, because I've noticed in our world today, what I feel like we're not doing is hitting the pause.
You're absolutely right. And what I coach people is, before you say anything, before you react, stop and take 2 slow, deep breaths. And by the time you do that, you've lost that impulsive, that reactivity. Maybe you haven't lost it, but you've calmed it down enough. Because you're right. And it's the world we live in. We've trained ourselves for instant gratification. If you want something, pick up your phone.
Yeah.
If you want to figure out where you're going, pick up your phone. If you want feedback on what you put on Facebook,
right,
pick up your phone. It's that instant gratification. And we've got to slow that down. Just stop and breathe. We all have to breathe.
Yes, ma'am. And sometimes it feels like, too, that we react so quickly out of our fear and our anxiety, or whatever that emotion is for us. And we know that all of that is okay. It's okay to feel what you feel. But most of all, what we've learned even in our faith is, what are you going to do with what you feel? How do we work around that when things are so hard? Things around us right now seem so impossible. And yet, nothing, we're taught, is impossible with God.
Wow.
And yet my brain cannot sometimes go, okay, I'm not sure where we go from here, which I also know is a point of faith. But at the same time, what are some good practices that we can do in the midst of those moments?
I think, reflection.
Okay.
Because if you take the time to reflect and process,
Okay.
I don't think, a lot of times we don't
Yeah.
process what's going on. I don't have time. I don't have time to deal with that today. Yes, you do. Because the only way that you can, when you're in that reactive mode, you've got that habit looping. You've got that negative ruminating thoughts going round and round. You're overthinking everything, and you're just building it. You're building that fear. You're building that reactivity. And if you can stop and ask yourself, what am I reacting to?
Right.
What am I reacting to? Am I mad? Am I sad? Do I just want somebody to listen to me and to listen to my opinion? And that's the only way that you're going to get all that out of your head, is to process it. Maybe you journal. Maybe you pray. Maybe you put your music on. Maybe you sing. Everybody processes differently. Maybe you just need to get up and move. Maybe you need to feel the sun on your shoulders. But whatever it is, ask yourself, how do I reflect? How do I process? Instead of reacting to what I feel, how do I just feel it?
Wow. That's so much to really think about, isn't it? And in the world we live in today, where I feel like every social media post we see, everyone that's in a conversation with me starts out usually, we've been in finishing out a series about what it means to be happy. And I made this comment the other day that I never have someone ever walk up to me and go, I'm so happy. Most of the time I have someone that walks up to me to tell me everything that's wrong.
Yeah.
And usually it's out of frustration or fear or sadness, because there is change that we can't control, and there is change that we can. But it still seems to just get so intertwined and so messed up, which is where I feel like we are today. It's like we cannot get along if we don't just completely feel the exact same way or
But
see the same thing.
Dee Dee, what we can do is we can focus on what we can control.
There you go.
And what you can't control, let it go.
Yes, ma'am.
And where do we spend most of our time focusing? On the things that we absolutely cannot control.
So how do we change that?
Well, I think prayer is a really good first step towards that. And I think the second is create some self-awareness. Pay attention to what's going on inside your head. Catch yourself.
Yeah.
A lot of times working with clients, coaching them, I'll catch myself. Take a deep breath.
The pause.
The pause. It's the pause.
Yeah.
It's the pause button. There you go. You knew the answer to that all along.
Well, I have really appreciated this. I would love it if you would come back for another segment with us and talk even a little bit further about how we can constantly maybe get into some daily exercise and maybe how we can live further into that pause and what that looks like.
I would love that.
Thank you so much for being with us today. What does it mean for us to stop and deal with change? Change is not going to end.
No, it's not.
Change is not going to end. But we're going to dive into that further again with Dr. Leigh. Thank you for being with us today. Know that you can find us on any platforms, but you can also find us at llumc.org. Thank you so much for being with us today.